Hi, I'm Carson, and today I'm going to be presenting a critique on a 2016 study regarding sea level rise at the coastal level. The paper was published in the PNAS um, by Jev Rajeva, et al., and colleagues, and it had a really important fundamental change on how we think and plan for rising sea levels by showing that different cities will face very different risks. So, why do regional projections matter? The problem that the paper solves is, you know, global versus city. They're very different considerations, and we can't make a generalization. Climate science is something that's heavily debated, and the traditional number that many people argue is things like sea levels will rise by zero point 0.9 meters by the year 2100. That kind of thing doesn't really help a city like New York or Lagos plan their future because they have entirely different, environments, ecosystems, access to water, and considering that metric as a one truth is dangerous for making these long-term plans. Um, so what they went and did is they asked, how can we give each city its own projection to enable them to make their own plans? And that's what's important about this paper. So what was the method that they used? They used a probabilistic approach where they implemented 33 different climate models, totaling into 83 realizations. They ran 5,000 Monte Carlo simulations for 136 cities across the world, coastal cities. And this included five different factors: warming oceans, melting glaciers, the Greenland ice sheet, the Antarctic ice sheet, and changes in the water storages on our lands. And the output wasn't just one number. Um, as you know, the spirit of this approach and this study was to, break down the definitive, you know, the global generalizations. They also brought in, you know, different means, percentiles, etc. So through this, we have an upper bound and a lower bound and our median so that we can have this range of calculations that can be much more useful for our future planning, where you have different considerations and simulations that you can run in your own. Okay? So then, what do we see in this paper? There's not a uniform rise in sea levels, which we've already addressed, and we know of this, right? But when we look at different cities, you're going to see very, very different numbers. So, ignoring for now, if we solely consider the upper bounds compared to the global mean, if we look at New York, we see a very stark difference, right? This is what, 2.1 meter difference. And then we go on to Guangzhou, where you see a 1.03 meter difference. These are very, very different calculations, up to the worst case, over two times the global average. Um, the big takeaway to get from this is that over 70% of coastlines will exceed the global mean at an upper estimation consideration. Some places where, you don't have as much access to water, landlocked cities, for example, cities in Ohio. These cities won't be impacted as much, and they may even have a lower thing to consider. So this helps a lot with future city planning. And what it tells us is that global numbers don't tell the full story, and that cities need their own numbers, or else they will drastically underplan their security or over time. So, what makes the research done good? There's three strengths. There's methodological innovation. Nobody's done city level projections, at least at the time that they did. Second, it's useful. It's, these 136 cities directly were, simulated. They considered all metrics. They brought in people from across the world to make these calculations as, robust and unbiased as possible, grounded in actual information and data dated to these localizations. And that helps us with our future planning, long-term plans. I've written down 50-year decisions. These are plans that need to be done with a lot of consideration. So having this specific guidance, these cities are going to be able to have a much better grasp on what it is they need to do. And finally, the focus is on the worst case scenarios. The, moderate ones for an issue like this, a sea level rising, it's much better to overplan, overestimate, especially when, you might see a 1 meter difference at the worst, right? It's better to overplan than to underplan. You want to be safe and secure rather than risk losing, a large part of your city infrastructure due to trying to cut costs. So continuing onwards, what makes this good research? Let's look at three limitations. So starting off, most importantly, they don't consider land sinking, right? These considerations, their innovations and stuff. They don't go into the more large scale global issues, where, for example, the weight of structures are going to weigh these places down. They focus on more regional specific calculations. Next, the practical relevance. Sorry, these things are very specific, very considerate of the circumstances and environments, not just ecological, but political. With your policymakers, considering the workforce, the finances, the abilities for these cities to collaborate together to come to these conclusions. And then finally, there's a transparency with, these things are not certain. We aren't sure of the exact measurements. We aren't sure of the exact numbers. And they really enforce that by sort of giving us upper and lower bounds, means, medians, all those things. So yeah, next, the critical limitations. So these are our three limitations. So this is what I was referring to in the slide before, but they don't consider land sinking in their projections. When you add that with the sea level rises, for example, the real problem is much worse than global calculations, right? Where the 0.9 global for Jakarta's instance in the document, we see a very large difference and a different scale of what dangers might be arising, right? So there's a limitation in the information they provide for that. They also don't really provide much direct course or guidance or potential applications to resolving all of these issues, right? They provide the reader with the issue itself, and then lets it go off from there. So there's no real roadmap to go off of from the start. Thankfully, though, this is mitigated by the thorough investigations and collaborations, government structures that would be able to implement these changes. But this allows easy integration from private institutions that could potentially group with government institutions or organizations to collaboratively ensure the safety of the future. Yeah, the final one is that they have a very high prioritization on the worst case emissions. So when they do their calculations, they do give us those upper and lower bounds as I mentioned, but it's more of a doomsday sort of thing, which it's that's very good, but again, it comes to attention with the global consideration, where we were worried about the generalization and misinformation from that. We can also see that in this paper. Right. So next, a quick assessment on the document. So the significance, the paper really did have high significance on the sort of issue that I was addressing. It changed how we do coastal planning as a whole, changed the scope that we consider. But in regards to limitations, there's some that are involved, and on a surface level, this paper is very impactful, but we're missing the what, the how, the when. And 10 years later from the document, we haven't seen much progress in these issues. And going off of the 2100 year, 2100 benchmark, we're getting there quickly. So we need action. So it's not what will happen anymore, but what will we do about it? And for this, this is where I would open the questions. But in regards to this, there isn't really much ability for that. But for something that I can offer is, maybe to you, is there something that you've seen in, your close relativity, with different classmates? For example, we're all from across Canada. So maybe in your city, have you seen any initiatives going, or have you seen maybe any government things falling apart that are slowing any progression that we could make? But yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening. I hope I was able to be informative on the critique. Overall, the document, the research paper, was very, very informative and pivotal in the space, but it doesn't consider a few things, and there's limitations that would really have it be a solid, impactful piece. And that's something that's missing and is ideally addressed with urgency by other researchers.